morning and thanks again for joining us this morning for the Gallery TV newspaper review. My name is Titilayo Olamide. This morning I have with me the Punch newspaper, I have the Daily Sun, the Nigerian Tribune, the Nation, the Guardian, and of course the Daily Independent newspaper this morning. But starting with, I go with the Punch newspaper. And on the front page stories of the Punch newspaper this morning, I have the major news headline. It says compulsory vaccination. Compulsory vaccination, NMA. Joe Asuki as federal government threatens sanction. You can't force people, enlighten them. NMA. Health workers advise federal government. Court stops Edo. People who reject vaccine endangering others. Rule will be applied, says MPHCDA boss. And the stories can be found on page 2 inside the Punch newspaper this morning. And moving above the major news headline, 6 million electricity customers will still unmetered amid federal government scheme. This also can be found on page 19 inside the Punch newspaper this morning. And on the matter of open grazing, Lagos Delta Cross River bills pending as deadline ends today. You can get a copy of the Punch newspaper this morning to read more on those stories. And I'm moving ahead, and that's on page 19. Peng ASSAN blames rising cooking gas price on Forex. That is that Forex trading has been the cause of the hike in the price of cooking gas recently. To read more on that story, you can get a copy of the Punch newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And then I have out school children. Federal government not responsible, says Oshibajo. Federal government is not the one responsible for the children that are out of school. And that is coming from the Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo. You can turn into page 18 this morning to read more on that story. And then moving ahead, and that's below the major news headline. It says seized Tucano jet cost almost $500 million US, and that is coming from the United States envoy. You can see the picture, the pictorial news of the Tucano jet which landed in Nigeria yesterday. And I'm moving ahead, and that's still on the front page stories of the Punch newspaper this morning. Court orders interim forfeiture of Abiodun 8 bank accounts and house. You can turn it to page 4 and 5 this morning to read more on that story. And then moving ahead, we owe salaries due to beneficity of funds, and that is coming from the governor of Ondo State, Rotimi Akeredolu. And then ahead, Afenifere tells Nigerians to defend themselves against bandits. And you can get a copy of the Punch newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And I'm still on the front page stories of the Nigeria dailies, and that's on the Punch newspaper this morning. And that's on page 4. Says PDP leaders visit Jonathan, beg ex-president to stay. That is on the rumor of the former president of Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan, leaving PDP to APC. And I'm moving ahead, court remands Ekiti man for raping 17-year-old daughter. You can get a copy of the Punch newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And then lastly, the last story on the Punch this morning, fix your cut-off marks, JAMB tells varsities others. Fix your cut-off marks, JAMB tells varsity and others. You can turn into the Punch newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And with that, I move to the Daily Sun newspaper. And of course, on the front page stories of the Daily Sun newspaper this morning, and on the major news headline, I have confusion over alleged Plateau assembly ceiling. Military warns residents against self-defense. You can check page 4 and 6 this morning of the Daily Sun newspaper. And moving ahead, the major news headline, 2021 admission, JAMB institution the site fate of 1.4 million candidates today. Moving above that, on page 25, Nigerian grown as cooking gas price is 7,000 naira per 12.5 kg. VAT on LPG imports begins. You can check page 25 of the Daily Sun newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And moving ahead, CJN Summerset State CJs over conflicting court orders. Rivers, Anambra, Imo, Kebbi, Cross River, Jigawa affected. That's on page 6. While reshots at cargo boats on Bonny River, DHQ, and that's on page 6. CBN blames technical partner on e-naira rollout. Federal government pays 500 billion naira for sustainability plan. You can check that on page 2. Don't lose hope, can't PFN tells Nigerians. Edo community protests May activities. That's on page 6 and 26. Corruption PDP turns APC says Amechi's comments vindication. That's on 29. Ganduje opposes legalization of cannabis, and that's on page 4. Lastly, operates within law, embassy tells media. And with that, we move to the Nigerian Tribune newspaper this morning. On the front page stories of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper this morning, on the major news headline, I have compulsory COVID-19 vaccination, court stops Obaseki. Federal government considering basic rule of law on Nigerians refusing vaccination, and 2.9 million vaccinated. Third wave stabilizing in Africa. That is coming from the WHO. You can turn into page 3 this morning to read more on that story. And then moving above the major news headline, JAMB Council UTME cut-off marks, institution now decides benchmark. You can get that on the front page story of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper this morning. And then moving to page 29, 20 billion naira salary loan. Court freezes Kogi State Bank accounts. You can check page 29 this morning of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. And then Akeredolu signs anti-open grazing bill into law. Akeredolu signs anti-open grazing bill into law. You can check get a copy of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper this morning to read more on that story. Moving ahead, and on page 7, CBN directs banks to publish names BVN of forex defaulters. You can check that by getting a copy of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And then on page 6, naira down to 526 naira per dollars, loses 26.1% value in 4 weeks. You can get a copy of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And I'm moving below the major news headline this morning, and that's still on the front page stories of the Nigeria Tribune this morning. And kidnapping, terrorism now, Afenifere tells federal government, says Nigeria for moving to the prejudice. You can get a copy of the Nigerian Tribune this morning to read more on that story. And the next story, tertiary institutions give priority to IGR at the expense of quality education. That is coming from the panel report. As federal governments receive visitation panel report to IBB tertiary institution. You can read that inside the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. And still on the front page stories of the Nigerian daily newspaper, China's TV interview. Retired Commodore Olawumi reports served at Defense Intelligence Agency. Retired Commodore Olawumi reports served at Defense Intelligence Agency. You can get a copy of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And then moving ahead, gunmen again invade hospital in Bayelsa, rob doctors and patients. And then lastly, Olu of Warri, the South's traditional councils and committee. You can get a copy of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper this morning to read more on those stories. And then with that, we move to the Nation newspaper this morning. On the Nation front page stories this morning, the major news headline says Buhari, policy consistency puts economy on rebound. You can read more on that on the front page of the Nation newspaper this morning. On the front page newspaper of the Nation newspaper this morning, and that's moving above the major news headline. It says banks to publish names, BVN of forest rule breakers. That's moving ahead, JAMB scraps uniform cut-off mark in UTME. JAMB scraps uniform cut-off mark in UTME. Moving below the major news headline on the Nation newspaper this morning, PDP elders in talks with Wike on party crisis. PDP elders in talks with Wike on party crisis. You can get a copy of the Nation newspaper this morning to read more on that story. Lastly, Super Tucano jets deployed to battle bandits insurgents. Super Tucano jets deployed to Nigeria to battle against bandits and insurgents. You can get a copy of the Nation newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And then moving ahead, I move to the Guardian newspaper this morning. On the major news headline of the front page stories of the Guardian newspaper this morning, I have federal government set to sanction Nigerians refusing COVID-19 vaccination. Federal government to sanction Nigerians refusing COVID-19 vaccination. Court restrains Obaseki from making vaccination compulsory. Edo civil servants get 7 days ultimatum to get inoculated. And a new CI2 COVID-19 variant not spreading, says WHO. You can get a copy of the Guardian newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And then moving above the major news headline, JAMB abolishes own cost of marks, tertiary institution to the side. You can get the story on page 3 inside the Guardian newspaper. And then moving ahead, that's on page 4. States, not federal government, should be blamed for nation's education woes, says the Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo. And then moving ahead to page 9, Olawumi honors DIA invitations over interview with Channels TV. You can get a copy of the Guardian newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And then moving ahead, that's on page 9 also, motorcyclists defy ultimatums, take over Obalende Ikoyi Aziz of Lagos State. You can get a copy of the Guardian newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And then moving below the major news headline this morning, Akeredolu ignores Miyetti Allah, signs anti-open grazing bill into law. Oyo anti-open grazing law not effective 2 years after. Enugu resident seeks attachment of anti-open grazing law. And the Katsina bans interstate transport of cattle. Niger suspend cattle market over insecurity. And lastly, Afenifere takes raises concerns over alleged deployment of Northerners youth. You can get a copy of the Guardian newspaper this morning to read more on the stories. And then lastly with me this morning is the Daily Independent newspaper. On the front page stories of the Daily Independent newspaper this morning, it says Buhari backs Buni as forces ask him to quit as chairman. Stakeholders want Tinubu to speak out. You can get the story on page 4, and that is on September 4 APC local government congresses. You can read more on that story on page 4 inside the Daily Independent newspaper this morning. And then I move above the major news headline. Masari orders closure of major roads in Katsina to tackle banditry. Masari orders closure of major roads in Katsina State to tackle banditry, bans lorry from moving cattle to other states. You can read more on that story by getting a copy of the Daily Independent newspaper this morning. And in Nigeria attracts $10.1 billion forex investment in 6 months. Minister says country's economy getting stronger. You can get a copy of the Nigeria Daily Independent newspaper this morning to read more on that story. And then moving below the major news headline, Telcos loses revenue to slow deployment of 3G and 4G networks. Subscribers denied premier content. You can read more on the story inside the Daily Independent newspaper. On page 4, Labour kicks ahead planned electricity tariff increase. Labour kicks against the ahead planned electricity tariff increase. You can get this story inside the Daily Independent newspaper on page 4. And then on page 5, CBN asks banks to publish names, BVN of forex policy defaulters. And then moving to page 5 also, port congestion. Reps accuse customs of creating 18 illegal seats. And then on 2021 UTME, varsities, polytechnics, COEs at liberty to set cut-off marks. JAMB may prosecute institutions that violate central admission guidelines, and that's on page 30. This morning on the front page stories of the Daily Independent newspaper this morning, that's on page 6. Ondo as laws open grazing as Akeredolu signs bill into law. And then lastly on page 2, no new constitution, no 2023 election, Afenifere insists. And that's all for this morning on the Gallery TV newspaper review. Don't forget to join us by 12 p.m. and 4 p.m. for more news updates. I remain Titilayo Olamide. Thanks for watching and you have a lovely day. Bye for now.